Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the 105th, can you believe it, episode of the Royal Society of Medicine's COVID-19 series. I'm Victoria Macdonald. I'm the Health and Social Care Editor for Channel 4 News. And in this session, this very timely session, as we're all back from summer and looking ahead to the winter, we're going to be focusing on the dual variant and inline variant vaccine, the bivalent. In fact, I'm going to ask our guest how to pronounce that properly. And in line with all the other work we're looking at on COVID-19, this will offer an early insight into a key new development. Now, we are very lucky to be joined by Professor Anthony Harnden, who is Deputy Chair of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation, the JCVI. And he will explain what this is, and we may actually broaden it out into other things like the flu vaccine and what the coming winter is looking like, the future. But welcome, Anthony, and thank you so much for taking part in this. First of all, how do you pronounce it?
Bivalent vaccine.
Bivalent.
Yes.
Okay, we got that. I looked it up on a one of those pronunciation websites, and that's what they said too. But can you just explain it to us, because I think there is a bit of confusion around what's different from what had gone before and what this is.
Well, it's not hugely different, Victoria. I mean, what it is essentially is the one that has been approved by the MHRA is the Moderna. And it's a mRNA vaccine, and it has half a component of the original Wuhan strain and half a component of the BA.1 Omicron. So the mRNA will get the cells in the body to code for both some of the spike protein on the BA.1 as well as the original Wuhan. And so the body's immune system will recognize both of those and mount a response to that. So it's relatively simple. It's not a bigger dose of vaccine. It's a half and half vaccine, essentially.
I think there was a lot of discussion when it was announced about Omicron and its mutations, and we're up to, I don't know, 5 or 6 now, and whether it will be effective or whether it will need to be changed again as time goes on. What's the JCVI's thinking on that?
Well, the JCVI are fairly firm on this. We believe actually on JCVI that although these bivalent vaccines have some importance, it's not the critical thing. The critical thing is to get vaccinated. And we know that the original Wuhan strain vaccines are incredibly effective against what has been our prime objective on JCVI throughout the pandemic, is to protect against severe disease in those particularly vulnerable populations. And when I talk about severe disease, I mean that's COVID causing hospitalization or even death. And so actually, they have got a marginal benefit in protecting against BA.1, for instance, for this vaccine, or if you further variant vaccines come along, but the benefit is very marginal indeed. And the overwhelming benefit is from being vaccinated and from being boosted. As the pandemic has gone along and we've become much more familiar with the outcomes from these vaccines, as I say, the vaccines are good at preventing hospitalizations and deaths, severe illness. They're not so good at preventing infection. And the protection against infection probably lasts about 3 months before it dwindles down to quite low numbers. So this is why on JCVI we think getting those vulnerable groups vaccinated in a timely fashion, keeping the vaccine program simple, which is what we've done throughout by using one vaccine. The VTF, that's the Vaccine Task Force, has supplied a number of these Moderna vaccines, so we can keep it simple by using this bivalent vaccine. And having at least a 3-month gap between the previous vaccine seems to be a sensible strategy. Now, in terms of healthcare workers, of course, they are part of the booster program, but we really want because the main thrust of healthcare workers who don't fall in an at-risk group is to protect others. We actually would prefer to see them vaccinated at maybe a slightly later stage of the booster program, maybe towards the winter when it starts, the Omicron potentially starts circulating again.
I'm interested in the way you phrased at the beginning of this. So when we got the press releases, when we got the announcements, it was like, oh my goodness, this is an amazing new development. This is the vaccine we've been waiting for because it's going to deal with Omicron. But you're much more muted about it.
Yeah, I am, because to a certain extent, we're sort of chasing a thing that is changing all the time. So each new spike that we get, or each new wave, is a slightly different variant. So actually the last wave has been a BA.5 variant. So by the time that you've created the vaccine, you're almost behind the latest variant. That's not to say it does give a little bit of added advantage, but not hugely, because these are real drifts in the virus. They're not major shifts. If we happen to have a major shift and a major variant that produces very different characteristics in terms of outcomes for people, then we may be in a really important situation where we do need a variant vaccine desperately, but we're not in that situation at the moment.
A major shift would be like from Alpha to Delta, or more. You're thinking
or
even
more. I'm
more.
thinking. Omicron's become, was the latest sort of shift really from Delta, and is much more infectious, so it transmits more easily, but it gives a milder illness. And so we may get something that's more infectious that gives a milder illness as a shift, or we may get something, it's possible, hopefully it won't happen, but that becomes transmissible, that gives a more severe illness, and then things become a little bit more critical. But this is really crystal ball gazing, and at the moment we're in a situation where really the people that we want to protect are those elderly and those with underlying illnesses, because most people now have experienced both vaccination and actually COVID, and actually it's, for the majority of people who've been vaccinated, it's a mild illness. There is another very interesting immunological, and I'm not an immunologist, I'm a GP, but we've all had different exposures really now. Some of us were infected at the start before vaccination. Some of us were infected after the first vaccination. Some people had 3 vaccinations. And so what's called our immune printing is all very different, and how we respond to either infection or vaccination, there are nuances of differences, which may be important, may not be important. We don't understand that at the moment. So we call it, I think the immunologists call it the antigenic sin. The first exposure you have can print your immune memory. And so it's a very complicated picture, but what we're quite clear about is that even the original vaccines do produce really good protection against what we're looking for, severe disease. And so the imperative really should be to be vaccinated at the moment, rather than worrying about the particular type of vaccine.
It seems so long ago now when those first vaccines appeared. But one of the issues, of course, then was about safety and the safety data, and the concerns about how quickly they were being authorized and then put into the arms of the public. The same questions will inevitably arise over the bivalents. Can you give some reassurance on the safety data?
Well, the safety data that the vaccine company have shown in their trials is really no different than the safety data from the previous vaccinations. You never know when you put it into large numbers of people, but what we do have is evidence that the booster vaccine, that's the 3rd dose of vaccine for the majority of people, did not give any difference in a side effect profile than the first 2 vaccines that people have produced. So there's no real theoretical reason to expect that this further booster will give a different side effect profile. Most of these mRNA vaccines give minor side effects to people. So, fatigue, myalgia, fever, pain at the injection site are quite common. I think because the surveillance systems are so good in the UK and the US, that we really do have a very good grip on what the side effect profile for these mRNA vaccines are. So how it works in this country is that the Commission for Human Medicines, they have an expert working group that look at the both active and passive surveillance, and they feed into the MHRA, who then feed into the JCVI. So it's a very tight system. The UK HSA are also involved in producing data. So it's a sort of enhanced passive surveillance. There's rapid cycle analysis if a safety signal arises. There's targeted monitoring, and there's commissioned epidemiological studies as well through various academic groups throughout the UK, as well as through the UK HSA. And so it's really, really carefully considered. And everything is actually, if you look at the government website for the MHRA, on the safety bit, they go in detail about the safety signals and what they've done about each one and how they've reacted accordingly. So when I look back to earlier in the pandemic with the AstraZeneca vaccine and the thrombocytopenia, that was picked up fairly quickly and dealt with accordingly. So I've got great confidence in the surveillance system. And if you look over to the States, where they have the VAR system, the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, they published data in the Lancet last year on 300 million doses of the mRNA vaccines, and of which there were 22,000 serious adverse events. So these are really quite small numbers, but we do have a fairly key handle on what they're like. And we don't expect the bivalent vaccine to be any different, really.
No, I mean, one of the quotes I was reading from the head of Moderna, he was saying it was so effective it could be used annually. But looking at that, what you don't have is all the data publicly available. And this has been the problem all the way along, is how much is being released from the pharmaceutical companies. I know that you see stuff at the JCVI that we, the public, don't see. And I'm not asking you about that, of course, that's confidential. But do you think that there is enough safety data, for instance, in the public domain to reassure those people who are worried about it?
Well, I think don't forget that what the drug companies is, they do clinical trials. And so there will be data on their adverse events in the published data on the adverse events in the people that got the active ingredient, the vaccine or the placebo, and you can compare those two. But really, these are very small numbers, Victoria. What's important is that we've given many millions. Well, I just said, in the States, 300 million doses. I mean, we've given 150 million doses of vaccine in this country to date, and so we've got much better data now, actually, than the drug companies would ever have on the safety profile of the vaccine. So I have quite a lot of confidence that there's no hidden. It's all out in the open. There's really no hidden data here that would worry me at all. Generally, when we introduce vaccines in the country, within 3 months, we'll know whether there's a major safety signal. And that's exactly what happened with the AstraZeneca. It's what happened with the myocarditis and the mRNA vaccines. You do know fairly soon whether, and it's very unlikely, very, very unlikely that we'll see years hence, we'll see a side effect that comes out which we're not expecting. That hasn't been the pattern with any other vaccine programs, and I don't expect it to be with this.
No, I can see a question in the Q&A, and to those of you who are listening, if you do have a question, just pop it into the Q&A box. But this one is, what is your view about the Pfizer vaccine in pregnancy and lactation, as there seems to be some recent confusion and misinformation? Now, you and I were having a brief chat about this before, because even the explanation I had from the Department of Health was slightly confusing about why it had suddenly popped up into the MHRA. Do you know? I mean, you don't. If you don't,
well, I don't know why. I don't know why it popped up, but it's old information, because
yes.
we right at the start of the vaccine program, and we've had some criticism about this actually, but there wasn't data on pregnant women, and what we said right at the start, this was right at the start of the program, we said that on JCVI that actually it needed to be a risk-benefit decision from with the discussion with the individual clinician for pregnant women. So we were a bit worried that there were maybe some pregnant women that were healthcare workers at that time, which were quite exposed to the virus, but we didn't have the safety data. But as soon as we had safety data, and that was from the States, where they gave 20,000 doses to pregnant women, and found that really the side effect profile was no different than it was for the general population, we recommended that pregnant women get vaccinated, and that was in the April. So you know, there's no doubt that this vaccine is as safe in pregnant women as it is in the rest of the population. The problem with pregnancy is that, as the other thing that's happened over the course of the pandemic, is we've realized that pregnancy is actually a risk factor for severe COVID. And so pregnancy almost forms it does form a clinical risk group now for COVID vaccinations. So we really want to give out the message that if you're pregnant, you really ought to be vaccinated, and certainly have your booster, and be secure that it is a much safer option than being exposed to COVID, which can lead to stillbirths, miscarriages, and quite severe actual maternal outcomes. So it's as safe in pregnancy, both to mother and unborn baby, as it is to be given in the general population.
I think, and we've did some terribly sad stories on Channel 4 about mothers who weren't vaccinated. I remember meeting a woman who had to have an emergency cesarean in the intensive care unit while she was ventilated, and didn't meet her tiny little twins until, you know, more than a week after. I mean, thank goodness she survived. But there was a lot of confusion, I think, wasn't there, at the beginning over the messaging from various points.
I sort of accept that, Victoria, but we were quite clear on what we were in a very.
You might have been, but I'm not sure other.
But right at the start, we were in a very difficult position because there was no clinical data on pregnancy, and so, you know, we were sort of between a rock and a hard place. So we didn't quite know whether it would turn out to be a risk factor or not, and there was no safety data. So we were a bit more circumspect. But as soon as that safety data emerged, which was 4 months later, we said that we believed that pregnant women should be vaccinated with mRNA vaccines. Now it may be a justifiable criticism that we didn't message that strong enough, and to a certain extent, we depend a little bit on the media to help with this. And the media, yourselves and many of your colleagues in the media, have been incredibly helpful for the vaccination program over the course of the pandemic. But maybe we didn't get that messaging across, and maybe both the media and ourselves are at fault for that, right?
Yeah, actually, I don't even think it was the JCVI. I think there were other organisations at play who might have got a stronger message across at the time. So I'm not holding you responsible for that one. Let's look ahead. We've got some questions here that you've touched on, but if we can go back to this. What are the chances of the development of a further variant of COVID-19? Well, we discussed that emerging this winter, and thus requiring a trivalent vaccine to keep us safe. And combined with this is what do you think is the likelihood of having a combined universal SARS-CoV-2 and influenza A/B quadrivalent vaccine? Is that a reasonable expectation?
I don't think it's an unreasonable expectation. One of the issues is that COVID still hasn't morphed into being a seasonal illness. So we're still getting spikes, during the summer and things. And I think when it does eventually, and I think it will eventually morph into a seasonal illness, we can have a seasonal vaccine for it. And there's no theoretical reason why flu vaccines and COVID vaccines can't be combined together in the future. And how many valents just depends. I mean, as you know, the flu vaccine this year is a quadrivalent vaccine.
I didn't actually know that, but I'm looking forward to getting it, because we're not getting some very good signals out of Australia and New Zealand about their flu.
No, we're not actually, and that's a really important thing actually, Victoria, is that actually the flu season was much earlier in Australia this year, and actually was targeted at younger people. So it was children that were actually getting quite a lot of flu. And of course, we're sort of expecting that and it was flu A, which occurred early. So we're sort of expecting that might happen in this country. So we really do want to get people vaccinated against flu and get that child program with good uptake, which we've recommended. So we've recommended now all the over 50s, those with underlying illnesses, and those between 2 and secondary school age to be offered the nasal flu vaccine, live attenuated influenza vaccine, which we give via the nose. And really, it would be really good to see good uptake of that, because there's very good evidence that if children are getting it, they will transmit it. And then we are potentially going to have a very big outbreak this winter if it takes off, because we haven't got very much immunological memory now for flu. So collectively, so we have had quite low flu numbers for the last 5 or 6 years or so, and therefore the population immunity levels will be at a low, and therefore we're more likely to see more infections.
You do sound quite worried.
Yeah, I am. I think it could. I was worried last winter. Actually, I thought we may, but it didn't transpire. But I think more so this winter, because we're all sort of living with COVID, as it were. There isn't. There's a little bit more caution with masks, okay, but not anywhere near what we were doing last year or the year before, and so potentially. Yes, we have a exposure risk in this country, and given the pattern in Australia, it is a bit of a concern.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that cheerful note, why is the bivalent vaccine not going to be available for children? When will you be looking at that?
Well, it's the MHRA have not approved it to children. I think Moderna haven't applied for a license for children. I think there are other bivalent vaccines. Pfizer have got a BA1 vaccine, which I think they're applying for license for 12 plus. So
they've certainly, I think, in fact, I just printed it out. The FDA was looking at that, wasn't it?
Yeah, the FDA are actually interesting. The FDA are looking at the BA4-5 variant one, which they've only got animal studies in at the moment. So various countries are looking at different things, but I think the Pfizer have applied to the European Medicines Agency, and MHRA might well follow on that. And we'd be very happy if a bivalent BA1 Pfizer vaccine was approved by the MHRA. We'd be, potentially very happy to have a look at that.
I was just looking through this New York Times piece, but it's talking about the Pfizer and the Moderna one, but yes, for 12 and over, and saying that the officials in the Biden administration have argued that even as researchers work to understand how protective the new vaccines might be, inoculating Americans again in the coming weeks could better equip adolescents and adults if cases surge. Well, you've already reached that decision here?
Yeah, I mean, the group that I'm worried about in terms of children, not the well children, really, it's the children with underlying illnesses. And it'd be nice to have a booster vaccine that was a variant vaccine. But as I said right at the start, Victoria, these other the Wuhan strain vaccines are very good. So vaccinating those children with a booster of that, those at-risk children with the normal Wuhan strain of vaccine, will be as good, if not as, it will be as good, I'm sure.
There's a question, and I'm interested to know this because I did finally get COVID in June. And there is a window in which you were advised not to have your booster, isn't there? And this person here is saying in Australia it's 3 months. So I think we have something similar here, don't we?
Yeah, I think if you've had an infection, I think we said 4 weeks actually initially, but I don't think we particularly changed that advice. But the trouble is it needs to be a proven infection. What we don't want to do is people think they've got an infection and then delay their booster. That wouldn't be good. So there's no theoretical reason why after 4 weeks you shouldn't have a booster vaccine, but clearly if you've had a proven infection, then that's going to give you a boost for 3 months anyway. So it may be sensible to wait, depending on what your individual circumstances are and what your underlying illness or risk factors are.
It wasn't pleasant, I have to say.
No.
For those of you out there who are still hesitating on vaccination, it felt really awful, in fact. And I wanted to talk to you. This is slightly outside the JCVI, your JCVI role, more as a GP. How do you feel about those people who are still hesitating? Where do you think we've got to is there just a core group that are never going to change their minds, or do you still come across people who are wanting a bit more information, wanting to wait a bit longer?
Occasionally I do, but generally those that haven't been vaccinated now, because we've got such high coverage rates, the elderly, it's more than 95%, and for 3 doses, I think, and that actually they are getting smaller and smaller, those numbers. So you have a trickle of people that will be prepared to be vaccinated after discussion, but I think the majority of that group probably are fairly entrenched in their views. And at some point, we will stop the evergreen offer, which is the offer for everybody to have a primary course of vaccine. And they may have missed their chance by then. I mean, it does seem incredibly foolish, but I think it'd be very difficult now to have avoided getting COVID, even amongst those in those unvaccinated groups, because there's been so much COVID around over the various spikes and things that it's difficult. So I don't think spending huge amounts of energy on smaller and smaller numbers is, I think we, of course we do it as a GP, and of course if a patient hasn't been vaccinated and it's noted in the consultation, it may well be brought up. I would certainly bring it up, but I'm not. I think they're getting more and more difficult to reach out to those particular group.
Yeah, how do you say it? I mean, there's been some fascinating research done, but both at international and national levels on those people who are firmly entrenched, and about the source of conversation you have. But it must be very difficult for you, as not only as a GP, but somebody who's been at the heart of the response to COVID, to actually have somebody like that in front of you.
Yeah, no, it is difficult. But what I would say is that actually some of those people that didn't get vaccinated, it was due to access. And we've done so much to try and give people easy access to these vaccines. And so the ones, at the stage of the earlier stages, there were buses going around to local communities, and there were vaccine centres, pop-up vaccine centres, just to try and make it accessible, because I think they fall into sort of 3 groups. those that haven't quite got around to it yet, but are prepared to have it, those can be persuaded. Those that just can't get there or can't find how to access it, and we've done a huge amount of work on that. And then the third group are those that are probably never going to have it. And those are the ones that I just think it's just, it's increasingly difficult to justify spending huge amounts of time and energy on people that will never have it. Yeah. But still, those that have difficulty in accessing and those that haven't got round to it yet we should continue to put effort into those people.
What did you call it? A green?
Evergreen offer.
Evergreen. So when do you think that will stop? When is it?
I don't know. I think that's discussion that the UK HSA will have, but at some point they're not going to be able to have people just turning up for primary courses of vaccinations when they want to.
I was thinking about, this is a slight divergence in a way, but I was thinking about the polio campaign that's just started now, and that's I saw that being rolled out in Liberia of all places, and the most difficult message was, we're giving you a vaccine against the effects of the first vaccine you had. So the polio infections are from people who have either not been vaccinated or from having the live polio vaccine.
Yeah, I mean, this is why in 2004 we switched to the injectable polio vaccine, because we're getting more cases, vaccine-derived cases, than we were from the wild things. So the oral, and this is what has been the recent problem in London, the oral polio virus, which is still used in some countries of the world, actually is excreted. And what's been found in the sewage in London is vaccine-derived poliovirus infections, so vaccine-derived poliovirus. And potentially, if you've got low coverage rates in certain parts of London, which there are, unfortunately, then you have a population that's at risk of getting the illness from somebody who's been vaccinated with the oral poliovirus. And that's why there's a campaign at the moment to vaccinate all 1 to 9-year-olds in the London area with an additional dose.
Yeah, again, it's the messaging, isn't it? It's the similar way of getting it across to people. Yeah. We've got a question here that I really don't understand, because I am not a medical person, but I'm going to put it to you. Is the mRNA in the bivalent vaccine longer than the original vaccine? And if so, is it more challenging to assure mRNA purity, brackets full length chain, compared to the original vaccine? And does mRNA translation in the cell result in a single polypeptide chain?
I'm not sure I can answer this. That's a very technical question. I mean, my understanding is that the mRNA which they put in to it, I mean, it's not a length dependent thing, it's a coding dependent thing. So what it codes, I presume it will have some more base chains if it codes for two variants, but it goes into the cell, and then the cell produce proteins on the outside of that cell, which with spike proteins, which are either the BA1 or the Wuhan strain in this, and then the body recognizes it, mounts a response. So I'm not sure that the length of the actual mRNA makes really very much difference. I suspect it is a little bit longer theoretically, because there'll be more bases in it, but I don't think it makes much difference.
You answered that admirably, actually, and with authority.
I'm only a GP there. Yes.
No such thing as only a GP. Roger Kirby was asking a question about whether you have any comments about the law, the lawsuit, Moderna versus Pfizer. You may not, but it is perhaps I think some of us would see a little bit disheartening.
Oh, I don't know. I was a bit disheartened to hear that they're squabbling about who, because these mRNA vaccines have been around for a while, and I'm not sure that either company have had complete ownership over it. So I'll let the lawyers fight that out. But really, this is, they've made huge profits through these I mean, they're great things that they've done for the population, but they have made huge profits in a way, actually, paradoxically, AstraZeneca hadn't done. And yet, here we are using more of the mRNA vaccines. So for good reasons, but I don't really like to see these sort of squabbles, I think.
Was that disappointing to you?
Well, the AstraZeneca,
yeah,
it was disappointing because it is a very good vaccine. The problem that we had when we decided not to give it to the under 40s was this thrombocytopenia side effect, which was a devastating side effect. And though it was relatively rare, it was still more common than the complications of the illness that we were trying to prevent in that particular age band. So we had no alternative for the under 40s but to turn to the mRNA vaccines, which there were good supply, and use those in the younger age groups. But it's a fantastic vaccine for the developing world because, of course, it doesn't have the same sort of storage and transport difficulties that the mRNA vaccines have. So I think that, and given that, the AstraZeneca and Oxford group, actually, which I wasn't involved, though I'm a professor at Oxford University, I wasn't involved in anything to do with the development of the AstraZeneca Oxford product. But I do feel disappointed because I think that it's had bad press when it really probably shouldn't have done, because it's done some great things in our country and it will do great things in the developing world. And it is a very good vaccine still.
Well, again, when I was in Liberia, maybe 3 years ago, and I can't remember now, but they'd just flown in the AstraZeneca for the first vaccines and they couldn't get it distributed because the president had read about all the fuss and he wouldn't stand up and say, go and have this vaccine. So I fear a lot of it was wasted, actually, at the time. Well,
we were worried that would be happening, and we sort of, because where if you go to somewhere like Liberia or Chad, for instance, where the life expectancy is only 40 or something, actually it's really important that these people are vaccinated against COVID, much more important than they worry about a very rare side effect. Whereas we were faced with the fact that actually, the disease prevalence was going down at that stage. We had a relatively well under 40 population. And we knew that between 30 and 40, I think that we would have seen somewhere around 150-ish. I can't remember the exact numbers now, of severe side effects due to that vaccine. And these would be people with young children, and the risk benefit didn't work. And we had mRNA vaccines around, so that's why we had to make the decision. But we were I remember those discussions on JCVI, we were very, very aware that the potential message we were sending out to the developing world, where we thought it would be absolutely the appropriate vaccine. So that was really difficult.
I mean, we have somebody here saying, yes, the bivalent vaccine was long awaited, perhaps even better. We would love to see a pan-variant vaccine to cover all or any future potential variants. But on a more ethical point, why the emphasis on the fifth vaccine, third booster, rather than shifting the emphasis to ensure the rest of the world, particularly the less well-off countries, has at least the basic first 2 doses covered to provide a broad global cover? And that goes back to the WHO, as you know, we're only safe when everyone is safe.
Well, I have great sympathy for that view. I think, the JCVI remit is to provide advice for the UK government, for the UK population. And we try and provide the best advice on the vaccines which are procured by the Vaccine Task Force and look at the evidence. But, I have sympathy for that view. I think that, it's important that the rest of the world have access to vaccines, COVID vaccines. Otherwise, we're going to see, we're never going to see the end to this. We're going to see more variants arising, which may in turn come back to bite us. So.
Well, you said yourself, I mean, and very sympathetically, that you were worried about your statement and what impact it would have internationally, and particularly in developing countries.
Yeah, I mean, we were, but we weren't quite as bad as Europe. What Europe had done. I mean, I remember going for interviews and asked to comment on Macron's view that the vaccines were quasi effective in the over 65s, and then sort of a few weeks later they were only giving them to the over 65s and not to the younger people. So there were a lot of mixed messages coming out from Europe about the AstraZeneca vaccine as well, and there were fights between where it was manufactured and who had access, and the Europeans were behind. And so I don't think it was just us that caused these difficulties, but we were aware of that, and but at the our ultimate responsibility was for the UK population, and we made the decision accordingly.
This might be you might just have given the answer to this, but I've been thinking about you all sitting there on your Zooms and discussing the latest findings and what decisions you were going to make. What do you think were the most satisfying or successful decisions you made during this time?
Well, I think the one really successful decision, and this caused an awful lot of anxiety and grief at the time that we made it, I remember, was right at the start saying that we would have a delayed second dose. So Pfizer had done all the clinical trials on a 2-dose schedule, if you'll remember, base and 3 weeks, and AstraZeneca had done it on a 2-dose schedule, 0 and 4 weeks. But we knew from the AstraZeneca trial data that actually, and there were a number of people which had slipped their dose, their second dose, those that got a second dose later seemed to have a better and more sustained protection. And we knew that we needed to get as many vaccines into people as quickly as possible. And so we made the decision in December that year, to 2020, to delay the second dose, to have a 12-week interval. Of course, many people have already received their first dose of vaccine in December and had already been booked into appointments for a second dose. And also the healthcare workers were receiving 1 dose and were expecting their second dose much quicker. And there was an awful lot of controversy, driven a lot by the BMA at that point, saying that this was an outrageous decision and that we weren't protecting healthcare workers, and that older people were being contracted to have their second dose of vaccine. And yet we knew that if we gave them that second dose, we'd be denying somebody else their first dose and be giving them good protection. And we worked out that we would save per million doses of 4,000 extra lives by doing this. I mean, it was a really critical decision, and that turned out to be true, that it was the right thing to do, and it did save tens of thousands of lives by that decision. And it was a big, bold decision that went against the grain of what the drug companies' trial data had said, and what other pressure groups were putting on us. But I think that was probably a really, really key decision. And then I think there are other key decisions. I think the AstraZeneca decision was a key decision of restricting the use in the under 40s. I think the children's decisions were very, very difficult, because the benefits against the risks were relatively marginal. And there was a huge lobby, both from those that wanted to be their children to be vaccinated and those that didn't want their children to be vaccinated. And the debate was so polarized. And here we were sitting in the middle with actually data probably showing it did show marginal benefits. So we felt that it was the right decision to go. And that was a difficult.
That was an entire population discussion, probably for the first time ever, about risk-benefit ratios.
Yes.
Everybody, if you could have gone into the pub at the time, that would have been one of the discussions.
Exactly.
That suddenly, you know, the whole world was an epidemiologist and understood also that fine line.
Exactly.
It's hard to remember now just how febrile the debate was then.
And still is to a certain extent. There are still people that absolutely believe we should not have offered vaccinations to children, and there are people that think it's absolutely outrageous that we were slow. It's what was called slow with the decision. In fact, we weren't very slow with the decision. We came up with a decision fairly quickly, but there was a lot of delay because of this polarization and debate about whether that advice was going to be accepted or not.
Well, even within the JCVI, as I remember, there was a polarization.
Yeah, well, there was, but what's really good about JCVI is we sort of have great open debates, but then we have sort of cabinet responsibility, and once we've made the decision, we stick with it and stick together as a group. So it's been a very well functioning group in that sense, is that people have from different disciplines have different perspectives, different ways of interpreting the data. But when we make a collective decision and we make a statement and give advice, we collectively stick to that.
A lot has been made, and I never quite understand this, about the UK being the first to roll out the bivalent, the first to make a decision. Or actually, we weren't the first in the end about children, but it doesn't matter the speed with which we do these things.
I don't think so. I think you know, it's not a real race that we're the first, or you know, I don't think so. I think what's really important, though, as I said again at the beginning, and I'll say again, is that we have timely boosting vaccinations this autumn. So starting in, you know, this month, well, we're September the 1st now, aren't we? So I think it's starting this month, and that we try and get those at-risk groups vaccinated against both COVID and flu as quickly as possible. So it's the speed that we roll out the vaccine program, which is more important, I think, than the actual vaccine type.
Will we see it extended beyond the 50s and overs and the at-risk? Do you think it will then go, as we've seen in the past, the 40s, the 30s, the 20s, and then into the children?
Well, I'm not so sure about that, because I'm not sure that you know, we'll continue to review according to the background epidemiology. That's the frequency and distribution of COVID. But you know, we have a highly immune population, and you know, if the key thing is to vaccinate, the key reason for vaccinating is to prevent severe disease. You've got a highly vaccinated young well population who really aren't at risk of severe disease, you know, so immune population who aren't at risk of severe disease. So I'm not sure about the necessity to go much below 50, which is the cutoff which we've decided, unless the background epidemiology of the virus changes in some sort of way.
So it would be, you foresee an annual vaccination program, you know, round about this time next year we'll be having the same.
Well, I think if it morphs into a seasonal illness,
do you have high hopes if that's the right way of putting it?
I think it will do. I think it will do. It's a respiratory illness. I don't see any reason why it won't do. It hasn't done yet, but when it does, and we work out who needs that vaccine, and that is likely to be the at-risk population, which is age and underlying illness, then I foresee that there will be some sort of program, whether it's needed every year or every 2 years. Again, it's, you know, it's going to be all data driven, and how these things work in the real life, and you know, what we see at the time. But yes, it's possible.
I mean, there's constant vigilance, isn't it? And we know that there will be, if you look at any pattern of any pandemic, it doesn't just straight line down and disappear. I think that's probably what people don't entirely understand.
Yeah, no, that's right. That's right. There's ripples. You know, you throw a stone in the water, you get a big splash, and then you get ripples afterwards, and that's what we're seeing at the moment.
There's a question here too, which goes back to what we were talking about before, but have there been any trials on giving COVID vaccine at the same time as the flu vaccine? But I think a lot of people had that last year anyway, didn't they?
Yeah, no, there's been studies on that yeah, there have been, and there's no problem with that at all.
And what about supplies? So I was a bit confused by how much of the bivalent vaccine, you may not know this, as it doesn't entirely fall into your remit either, but do we have enough to give everybody who needs it, the bivalent, or will, again, some of us just be given a booster of the, is it a monovalent or a univalent?
You can call it monovalent, can't you? The original Wuhan strain vaccine. Yeah, no, that's fine. I suspect that, I mean, the government, I think, have got, I understood, 18 million doses or so of the Moderna. So I'm not quite sure in what tranches that arrives, and then they will have ordered some of the potentially of other vaccines that may get MHRA approval. For instance, the Pfizer vaccine that I talked about earlier, the bivalent Pfizer vaccine. So I think we'll go with what they can supply, but I wouldn't think that anybody that is eligible should get worried about it, because I think whatever vaccine they have will be better as a booster than waiting for whatever vaccine that might be around. So I think there's plenty. I think there's enough to go around.
Somebody here says, we're busy sending you influenza viruses in 787s already from Australia. So thank you very much, but that is probably for sure. But don't worry, I'm going to New Zealand at Christmas, so I'll take something back from here. What do you think about the testing regime? So we've seen that they're stopping testing in certain hospitals and so on now. Do you think that needs to be?
Well, ultimately, we've got to live with this virus somehow. And I'd say you can still get testing, can't you, if you need to? And I'm sure that rather than have routine testing, working out when it's clinically appropriate to test somebody is a much better strategy, really, longer term. So I don't really have any problem with that, really. I think it's got, it's all part of the evolution to living and coping with COVID. But clearly, if you've got a ward full of, or a couple of rooms full of people with potentially immunosuppressed condition, then you want to make sure that you don't introduce COVID into that environment. So you may have to test people then.
Somebody here was just saying regarding vaccine hesitancy, I agree with Professor Harnden that access is really important, not just physical access, but culturally appropriate access. Vaccines being offered in trusted places with the support of trusted community members and organizations. And actually, in my time going around vaccine centers, I saw quite a lot of that,
early stages in the pandemic and now, we got hold of community leaders, we got hold of local faith leaders, we gave it in, for instance, in mosques, in synagogues, we did everything we could do to make it culturally appropriate for that those groups of people. And I think we're quite successfully in places. I think the person that sent in the question is absolutely right, that actually, people have more trust in local leaders in some of these communities than they will, the government or the bodies like us are saying nationally or advising nationally. Sometimes it's the local people that make a difference, a big difference. So that, I'm very grateful for that. I think that was all part of, the whole success of the vaccine program. We mustn't forget those that encouraged and delivered the vaccines, and primary care was fantastic on this. I mean, primary care really did step up to the mark and delivered a huge proportion of the vaccine program locally. And I think about our own practice and how good not only the volunteers were there, the doctors, the nursing staff, and the the healthcare assistants, even the, locals and the helping out with a car park attendant and floodlighting the car park for us and things. I mean, there was a huge national and local spirit that was happening at that time, and that's why it was so successful, really, is that everybody felt they were in it together, and it helped. And for those, so I'm sort of waffling here a bit, but those vaccine hesitant, I think actually local faith and community leaders were really important.
Yeah, no, I agree. Just what did you think when you heard that they were closing the COVID-19 trial registry, the taking part in the trials? I know Kate Bingham was talking at the weekend about what a waste it was.
Yeah, a bit disappointed, but I suppose, ultimately we've only got a certain amount of resource in this country, and it's up to the politicians how they deliver that resource. I mean, that brings me on actually to the annual program. Of course, one thing that we haven't had throughout this pandemic is cost effectiveness. Now, every single vaccine decision beforehand was based on cost effectiveness, and before we have an annual program, it will have to go through the same rigorous cost effective criteria that all the other vaccine programs have, and will have to be weighed up against other healthcare expenditures, whether it be, coronary artery bypass operations or spending on latest drugs for multiple sclerosis or whatever. I mean, it will have to be compared against all these other interventions to check that it is cost effective to deliver in that sort of way. So you would
be measuring not just lives lost or the impact of long COVID, for instance, but things like days lost to the workforce.
Well, it's interesting. Quality adjusted life years, which will include things like long COVID and things, but also societal costs, which is what you're talking about, days off work. So we will have to bring some sort of measure into that. That's always been quite tricky on JCVI, and sometimes we haven't done that. But these things are all really important. So and of course, NICE do it all the time with new interventions as they weigh up the cost of that intervention, the potential gain, and how that compares with other interventions, because we just haven't got unlimited resources. And I think, the government do have to make some difficult decisions sometimes about resources. And whilst Kate Bingham, I'm sure, is right that it would be nice to continue, there must have been a cost to that and a reason for that.
So who will be responsible for determining that cost effectiveness of
for the vaccine program? It will be JCVI,
and when will you start that process?
But, well, I don't know. Haven't been asked to yet. I suppose when the government asks us to.
When we have a government.
Okay, I'm not going to go into that. We will always have a government, but even in difficult times and times of transition, there is a government. So difficult decisions do need to be made, but they will direct us at some point to decide on the basis of cost and effectiveness.
We are running out of time, but I want to ask you just one question. Are you going to be called to the COVID inquiry? Will you be giving evidence?
Quite possibly. Both myself and Wei Shen, who's the chairman of the COVID committee, might well get asked to questions. And we actually, interesting enough, we've had a big discussion on JCVI about, going through various events and what have you, just to refresh our memories on it all. So I would certainly be very happy to go up and talk about any of the decisions that we made during the course of the pandemic to the inquiry. And I expect myself and Wei Shen, who's Professor of Respiratory Medicine in Nottingham, will be the two that will be called.
Well, you've been very, very good at talking to us about a wide-ranging subjects, but I hope that people feel reassured about the bivalent vaccine and even how to pronounce it. But thank you for your time and answering almost all except the one question at the end. And I don't blame you for not answering that. For those of you who are still here, there are, of course, upcoming programs at the Royal Society of Medicine tackling inequalities conferences on Wednesday, the 14th of September. So please do join for that. And can I just say thank you again, Professor Harnden, for such a lovely discussion.
It's a pleasure. You're a great interviewer, Victoria.
Thank you. Thank you.